Jareth Holloway thought he had it all. His wife Liana, their 2 children, Arlo and Sienna, and the perfect life he had carefully built. But in the shadows of his own desires, a woman named Evora existed, a woman he had never truly met, yet one who had consumed his every thought. What started as a secret online affair turned into an obsession, and before he realized it, she had wrapped him around her fingers, leading him down a path of no return. By the time Jareth understood the truth, it was too late. His family was dead, and he was nothing more than a pawn in Evora's deadly game. Jareth Holloway lived the kind of life that many envied. He had a beautiful wife, Liana, who had stood by his side for nearly a decade. Their 2 children, Arlo and Sienna, were bright, full of energy, and adored their father. The family lived in a well-kept suburban neighborhood where neighbors exchanged polite greetings and children rode their bikes on the sidewalks. From the outside, the Holloways appeared to be the perfect family, stable, happy, and financially comfortable. But beneath that polished surface, Jareth harbored a secret that threatened to unravel everything he had built. For the past several months, Jareth had been living a double life. Late at night, after Liana and the children had gone to bed, he would retreat to his study, where he would exchange messages with a woman he had never met in person. Her name was Evora, and she was everything Jareth had convinced himself he needed. She was young, alluring, and most importantly, she seemed to understand him in a way that Liana never could. At least that's what he told himself. Their conversations were thrilling, filled with flirtation and promises of a future far removed from the responsibilities of fatherhood and marriage. It had started as a harmless escape, something to add excitement to his otherwise predictable life. Jareth had never planned on taking it seriously. But Evora had a way of pulling him in, making him crave her attention more than he cared to admit. She would send him carefully staged photos, flawless images of herself in expensive dresses, lounging in penthouse apartments, standing beside luxury cars. She spoke about extravagant vacations, high-end restaurants, and a lifestyle that Jareth could only dream of. She told him that she was independent, wealthy, and uninterested in men who didn't match her ambitions. She made him feel inadequate in his current life, planting a seed of dissatisfaction that quickly grew into resentment toward his family. Liana had begun to notice the change in him. He no longer lingered at the dinner table, no longer reached for her hand while they sat together on the couch. He seemed impatient, constantly checking his phone, his mind elsewhere. When she asked if something was wrong, he would dismiss her concerns with a forced smile, assuring her that work had been stressful. But the truth was that Jareth no longer saw Liana as his partner. She was an obstacle, a reminder of a life he was beginning to despise. Evora encouraged these thoughts. She would tell him that he deserved better, that he was wasting his potential in a boring suburban existence. She would ask him why he was still with Liana if he was so unhappy. Why? He was clinging to a life that only made him miserable. Jareth had no real answers, only excuses. He had built his family, and leaving them would be complicated. But Evora made it sound so simple. She told him that if he truly wanted to be with her, he needed to take control of his future. And that future, she insisted, did not include Liana or the children. At first, Jareth brushed off the idea. He wasn't a monster. He would never abandon his children. But Evora had a way of making the unthinkable sound logical. She painted vivid pictures of what their life together could be, unrestricted, filled with adventure and wealth. She told him she had connections that could make any problems disappear. She assured him that she would wait for him, but not forever. If he wanted to be with her, he needed to act soon. Jareth found himself thinking about it more often. He imagined what it would be like to start over, free from the obligations that tied him down. He began distancing himself from his family even more, coming home later, avoiding conversations with Liana, barely acknowledging his children. He told himself it was necessary, that it would make things easier when the time came. The more time he spent talking to Evora, the more convinced he became that she was his escape. She had given him hope, a glimpse of something better than the life he had settled for. But Jareth had no idea that he was being played, that the woman he had grown obsessed with wasn't who she claimed to be, and by the time he realized the truth, it would already be too late. Jareth Holloway's mind had become a battlefield, torn between the life he had built and the fantasy Evora promised. Every night, her words echoed in his thoughts, making his reality feel like a cage. She had a way of making him see his family as burdens rather than blessings, convincing him that he had outgrown the role of a husband and father. He found himself growing more impatient with Liana, more detached from his children. Arlo's laughter, once something that filled him with pride, now grated on his nerves. Sienna's innocent questions felt like interruptions to his plans. Liana's attempts to reconnect with him felt suffocating. Evora had given him a deadline. She told him she couldn't wait forever, that a man like him should be decisive, fearless. She reminded him that she had other options, that men of her world didn't hesitate. Jareth felt a sense of urgency creeping in, as if time was running out. He couldn't bear the thought of losing her, of returning to his dull, predictable life while she moved on without him. She had made it clear, if he wanted to be with her, he had to cut ties with his past. Completely. Jareth started considering his options. A divorce would be messy. Liana would fight for custody, and even if he managed to separate from her, he would still have to support the children. That wasn't what Evora wanted. She had been clear that she wanted no attachments, no lingering complications. He needed to erase his old life entirely. The idea sent a shiver through him at first, but Evora had a way of making it sound rational, even necessary. She told him about people who had done it before, men who had freed themselves from unwanted families and never looked back. She sent him news articles of disappearances, of cases where spouses and children had vanished without a trace. She spoke of ways to make it look like an accident, of how authorities often overlooked cases if they were handled correctly. Jareth knew she was testing him, pushing his limits to see if he was truly the man she believed him to be. And he wanted to prove himself to her. His thoughts darkened as he began planning. He watched crime documentaries, read articles, and researched cases where people had vanished. He started thinking about how he could do it without drawing suspicion. He considered faking a break-in, making it seem like a robbery gone wrong. He thought about poisoning, about fires, about staged accidents. Each idea felt more real than the last, as if he had already committed to it in his mind. Liana noticed the change in him. She could feel the coldness in his gaze, the way he no longer looked at her with love, but with something else. Something distant and unsettling. She tried to reach him, to remind him of the life they had built, but Jareth was too far gone. Every time she spoke, he heard Evora's voice in his head, reminding him that he was wasting time. The pressure intensified. Evora became more demanding, sending him messages filled with disappointment, asking if he was really the man she thought he was. She told him she was starting to lose faith in him, that maybe she had been wrong about him. Jareth couldn't stand the thought of losing her approval. He had sacrificed too much already. He had shut out his family, turned his heart cold, and committed himself to the idea of a new life. He couldn't back out now. The final push came when Evora sent him an address, a secluded cabin in the woods, far from prying eyes. She told him that once everything was done, he should meet her there. She would be waiting for him, ready to start their new life together. The message sent a rush of adrenaline through Jareth. It was real now. The plan was in motion. All he had to do was follow through. That night, as he lay in bed beside Liana, he felt nothing. No guilt, no second thoughts. He had made his choice, and by the end of the week, his family would be gone. Forever. Jareth Holloway woke up the next morning with a chilling sense of purpose. The weight of his decision no longer burdened him, it fueled him. He moved through the day like a man carrying out an assignment, methodical and detached. He studied, his family memorizing their routines with an intensity he had never shown before. He noted the time Liana took the kids to school, the moments when the house was empty, the predictable ways they moved through their lives. Every detail mattered now. He wasn't just a husband and father anymore, he was a man with a mission. 2. Plan formed in his mind like pieces of a puzzle locking into place. He decided on a night when everything would align perfectly, a Friday. Liana would be home, the children tucked in their beds. No one would expect anything unusual. Jareth knew he had to make it look like a break-in gone horribly wrong. He gathered supplies, a pair of gloves, a crowbar, rope. He wiped down each object carefully, ensuring there would be no traces linking him to what was about to happen. He thought about every detail, every potential mistake, rehearsing each step over and over in his mind. In the days leading up to it, Jareth played his role flawlessly. He was attentive, affectionate even. He made Liana believe he was trying to reconnect, easing her suspicions. He spent time with the kids, reading them stories at night, watching their favorite shows with them. He told himself it was necessary. If they suspected anything, the plan could fall apart. He needed them to feel safe. Evora continued to push him, sending cryptic messages that only deepened his resolve. She told him she was proud of him, that he was proving himself to be the man she always believed he was. She reminded him of their future, painting vivid pictures of the life they would share once he was free. Jareth clung to those images, using them as motivation. The thought of leaving behind the dull, suffocating life he had built kept him moving forward. The night finally arrived. Darkness settled over the neighborhood, the streets quiet and still. Jareth waited, his heart steady, his mind clear. He listened as Liana moved through her usual routine, tucking the children into bed, humming softly as she did every night. He heard the soft creak of their bedroom door closing, the rustle of sheets as she climbed into bed. He counted the minutes, waiting for the silence to stretch long enough to know she was asleep. He moved with precision, slipping out of bed and retrieving the crowbar he had hidden earlier. He made his way to the back door, where he had deliberately left the lock undone. He needed to stage the scene properly. He took a deep breath, then swung the crowbar against the door frame, splintering the wood just enough to mimic a forced entry. He stepped inside, his gloved hands tightening around the metal. His steps were slow, calculated. He approached the master bedroom first, where Liana slept peacefully, unaware of what was coming. He raised the crowbar, hesitating only for a moment before bringing it down with full force. The sound was muffled, but he could feel the impact vibrate through his arms. Liana barely had time to react. A second blow ensured she wouldn't get back up. He turned his attention to the children's rooms. He told himself they wouldn't feel anything, that it would be quick. Arlo's small frame barely stirred as Jareth stepped into his room. A single strike was all it took. He moved to Sienna's room next, his hands steady as he repeated the same action. His mind was eerily calm, almost mechanical. He had done what needed to be done. Blood pooled around him, staining the floor, the sheets, his gloves. He took a step back, assessing his work. The house was silent now. It was over. Jareth moved quickly, staging the rest of the scene. He ransacked the living room, knocking over furniture, pulling drawers open. He shattered a few dishes, making it look like a struggle had taken place. He left the back door open just enough, ensuring it appeared as though someone had broken in and fled. With his work done, Jareth stripped off his gloves, wiped down anything he had touched, and slipped into the shower. He washed away the evidence, scrubbing until his skin felt raw. By the time he emerged, he was a man reborn. He grabbed the the small duffel bag he had packed earlier, and walked out the front door, disappearing into the night. He was free now, or so he thought. Jareth drove through the night, the rhythmic hum of the engine filling the silence in his mind. His pulse remained steady, his hands firm on the wheel. The past few hours felt like a distant memory, a blur of careful execution. He had done everything right. He had followed the plan. No loose ends, no second guesses. He was on his way to Evora now, to the future he had sacrificed everything for. The cabin was miles away from the nearest town, hidden deep within a forest where no one would come looking. Evora had chosen it for that reason. She told him it would be their safe haven, the place where they could finally be together without anyone interfering. Jareth imagined her waiting for him, excitement in her eyes, ready to welcome him into their new life. The thought kept him focused as he navigated the winding roads, the trees closing in like silent witnesses. He arrived just before dawn, his body tense with anticipation. The cabin looked exactly as Evora had described, secluded, with a small porch and windows covered by thick curtains. He parked the car and stepped out, stretching his stiff limbs. The air was cold, carrying the scent of damp earth. He approached the door and knocked lightly, the sound disappearing into the quiet woods. There was no response. Jareth frowned, glancing around. The place seemed untouched, no lights, no movement inside. He knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. A strange feeling crept up his spine, but he shook it off. Maybe she was asleep. Maybe she had stepped out for a moment. He reached for the handle and turned it. It wasn't locked. The inside of the cabin was dim, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon filtering through cracks in the curtains. Jareth stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. The cabin was nearly empty, just a small table, a chair, and a single bed against the far wall. No suitcases, no signs of Evora's presence. His chest tightened. Something wasn't right. He reached for his phone, scrolling through his messages. The last one from Evora was hours ago, confirming their plan. He dialed her number, his fingers trembling slightly as he pressed the call button. The line rang once, then twice, before going straight to voicemail. A sense of unease settled over him like a heavy fog. He called again. No answer. His mind raced, searching for explanations. Had something happened to her? Had she been followed? Or... A flicker of movement caught his eye. He turned sharply, his heart slamming against his ribs. The shadows in the corner of the cabin seemed deeper now, shifting unnaturally. He took a step back, suddenly aware of how silent it was. No wind, no rustling leaves, just a suffocating stillness. Then his phone buzzed. A new message. His breath hitched as he looked at the screen. The sender's name sent a jolt through his spine. It wasn't Evora. It was an unknown number. Did you really think you'd get away with it? His fingers tightened around the phone. His pulse, once steady, now roared in his ears. Another message followed. You did exactly what I wanted. A cold sweat broke out on his skin. His gaze darted around the cabin, suddenly feeling like he was being watched. He tried to piece it together, to make sense of what was happening. Evora had planned this. She had guided him, manipulated him, pushed him toward this moment. But why? Who was she? A final message flashed on his screen. Smile, Jareth. You're on camera. His stomach dropped. He turned toward the far end of the room where a small red light blinked from the corner, hidden within the shadows. A camera. Recording everything. Jareth stumbled back, his mind reeling. The realization hit him all at once. He hadn't escaped anything. He had walked straight into a trap. Jareth's entire body went cold as the red light flickered in the darkness. The camera had been watching him since he walked in. He turned, scanning the walls, the corners, the ceiling, looking for more, knowing there had to be others. His breath came fast now, the air thick with something suffocating. Evora had played him. Every move he made had been under her control. He gripped his phone, scrolling through the messages again, as if reading them a second time would change what they meant. But the words were the same. You did exactly what I wanted. Smile, Jareth. You're on camera. A sharp noise outside made him jerk his head toward the door. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. Someone was out there. His mind screamed at him to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He was frozen in place, trapped in a nightmare he hadn't seen coming. The door creaked open, and Jareth's breath hitched. A figure stepped inside, silhouetted against the pale dawn light. His eyes struggled to adjust, to make sense of what he was seeing. It wasn't Evora. It wasn't a stranger either. It was someone he should have known was coming. Detective Renzo Calloway had been hunting him for weeks. The officer's face was unreadable, his stance steady, his gun drawn. Jareth barely processed the words when they came. Hands where I can. See them! Jareth didn't move. His mind spun, trying to piece together the parts of the story that didn't fit. How had the police found him? How had they known? He had covered his tracks. He had followed the plan. And then it hit him. Evora. She had been leading him to this moment all along. She had never been real. Or at least, not in the way he thought. The woman he had fallen for, the woman who had convinced him to kill his entire family, had never intended to run away with him. She had only wanted him to destroy his own life. Jareth's knees buckled as the truth became undeniable. Evora had catfished him. She had built an identity, one so carefully crafted that he had fallen for it completely. She had gained his trust, whispered poison into his ears, and guided him straight into destruction. And he had followed willingly. The weight of his crimes sank into him, pressing down like an unbearable force. Liana, Arlo, Sienna, his own wife, his own children, gone because of a woman who never existed. The detective moved closer, the gun never wavering. It's over, Holloway. Jareth knew he had no way out. His pulse roared in his ears as he imagined what came next. Prison, trials, the news headlines tearing him apart. He would be remembered as a monster, a husband who slaughtered his own family. And the worst part? He had done it all for nothing. His fingers twitched toward his pocket where he still had the knife he had packed as a backup. If he made a move now, he wouldn't survive it. He could end this on his own terms. One sudden motion and the detective would pull the trigger. It would be over in an instant. No courtrooms, no handcuffs. But then the screen of his phone lit up one last time. A video message. He knew before opening it what it would be. He clicked play. Evora's face filled the screen. Dark hair, sharp eyes, the features that had haunted his thoughts for months. She smiled, her expression calm, almost affectionate. But behind that smile was something else, something cruel. Did you really think I'd run away with you? She said, her voice smooth, controlled. You were fun, Jareth. But I never needed you. I just needed you to do exactly what you did. The video ended, and for the first time in his life, Jareth Holloway felt truly powerless. The cold bite of handcuffs snapped around his wrists. The detective's voice was distant, a muffled noise beneath the storm of his own regret. Jareth had thought he was the predator, but he had been the prey all along.